this is Sean. Sean and myself, Tahla, were both born in 1995. Sean was diagnosed with Down syndrome at birth. Despite this, we both loved to draw and both lived on farms and rode our quad bikes. We both loved to swim and water ski. And most of all, we both loved to make a mess. Spending time together was also a highlight. As you've just viewed, Sean, my cousin, has lived the exact same life as myself. However, statistics have proven that Sean is at higher risk of living in poverty compared to me. This is why we'll be targeting the population group of the people affected by disability in Australia. To begin, Jiorgia will define and provide statistics on the population group. Tom will provide an explanation to the inequality and poverty of this population group. Additionally, to show an up-close and personal experience, Alex will present an interview with an individual who has a disability, highlighting their experiences. Finally, Josh will discuss a social security benefit that supports the disabled population.
Disability. Disability refers to a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. Every 7 hours, an Australian child is diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. 15 hours, a child is born with cerebral palsy. People with disability have a poverty risk 1.6 times higher than people without disability. ACOS uses the internationally accepted poverty line, defined as 50% of median household income, and adjusts for housing costs. .4% of people with a disability were living in poverty in 2009 to 2010, compared to 12.8% of the total population. 27.4% of people with a disability are living in households below the 50% poverty line in 2009 to 2010. 48% are on a disability support pension. In 2012, there were 53% of people with a disability participating in the labour force compared with 83% of people working without a disability.
There are plenty of factors leading to poverty. There are also numerous amounts of arguments stating that many people are capable of work, but are just simply too lazy. As a result, the laziness can potentially lead to poverty. These circumstances are left to the public to decide on whether this is fair or not. Unfortunately, there are certain situations where people are unable to work due to certain circumstances, such as having a disability. According to A. Batavia and R. Beloria, disabled people are particularly vulnerable to financial instability and impoverishment due to reduced earning capacity related to functional limitations, low educational levels, limited financial reserves, and substantial medical costs. However, where do we draw the line? From an individual point of view, most disabled people are unable to work. There are numerous amounts of jobs out there, but none of them seem to be calling upon disabled people for positions. There are other alternatives, such as social groups, for them to keep busy throughout the day, but to hold a 9-to-5 paying job seems pretty unlikely. In a study completed by the US Census Bureau, we can see here that we have the earnings of employed population by disability status. A total of 34% of disabled people can earn less than $15,000 per year, whereas a total of 8% of disabled people earn $75,000 or more per year. It is quite clear that these figures are alarming, and we can see why the disabled are so vulnerable to poverty. Recent UNESCO studies indicate that 1 to 2% of disabled people receive an education. Recent World Bank estimates indicate that people with disabilities may account for as many as 1 in 5 of the world's most poorest people. Poverty and a lack of education go hand in hand and lock disabled people into a chronic cycle. Exclusion from education and employment means limited social contacts, poor health, and low self-esteem. As a result, income generating opportunities become further reduced, leading to chronic poverty, further exclusion, and higher risk of illness, injury, and impairment. From a structural outlook, the end result is always left from the employee's point of view. This may also relate to whether the working environment is safe and can cater for disabled wheelchairs. This can involve things such as ramps and elevators. If the working environment isn't accessible for the disabled, how will they possibly be able to contend for a job? Another influencing factor is that the employer will be seeking a reliable employee for the suited position. Sick days are limited, and they will be after a dependable employee. However, the burning question is, does this relate to inequality in any way? Certain people have their various opinions and many fluctuate. However, in an article by the Sociology Guide, they state that the different abled are not disabled only because they are physically or mentally impaired, but also because society is built in a manner that does not cater for their needs. We've been quite aware of the disabled living below the poverty line for quite a while now. My advice, it's time to start creating more jobs and workplaces that are accessible for the disabled.
Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm here to inform you about experiences and impacts of inequality and poverty of people with disabilities. Did you know that 1 in 5 Australians have a disability? Unfortunately, a disability may occur at any time in a person's life, or it may even be present from birth. Some disabilities may be obvious, while others may be hidden. Many of these people will suffer from inequality or poverty at some stage during their life. Today I'm going to have a look at different subject areas that may impact on equality and poverty and discuss them with you. Firstly, we're going to look at income and poverty. Income and poverty. In Australia, people living with a disability have lower incomes and are more likely to live in poverty than people without a disability. The relative income of people with disabilities in Australia is approximately 70% of those without disabilities. In 2006, the median personal income for a person living with a disability was $225 per week, compared with $480 for a person without a disability. The lower incomes and higher rates of poverty are driven partly by the lower employment levels of people with disabilities. Being in a paid workforce is also important for social inclusion, autonomy and decision making. In Australia, people with disabilities are half as likely to be employed as people without disabilities. Within the population of people with disabilities, women are less likely to be in the workforce, with a participation rate of 49% compared with a 60% for men. People with a disability in support employment position receive lower wage compared with the general population. The average gross hourly wage in supported employment is $3.61 compared with the minimum Australian wage of $15.51 per hour. Housing. People with disabilities are disadvantaged in the housing market and are particularly vulnerable to the effects of living in inappropriate accommodation, which can lead to negative health and social outcomes. The majority, 95%, of people with disabilities reside in households rather than cared accommodation establishments. It is common for people with a disability to fall out of home ownership due to the cost of their disability, with 32% of people with a disability who are rental tenants reporting that they used to be homeowners. Education. Higher levels of education are associated with higher levels of workforce participation and better health. People with disabilities have, on average, lower levels of education than the rest of the population across a range of impairment types. People with a disability are less likely to have higher qualifications, including certificates, advanced diplomas, bachelor's or degrees, or above. In Victoria, in 2011, 45% of students with disabilities attended special schools. Children with an intellectual disability have better academic and social outcomes if they attend a mainstream school. The social impact on other children has been found to be consistently positive, and the impact of academic performance is either neutral or positive. Let's look at health. 35% of people with disabilities report poor or fair health compared with 5% of people without disabilities. Self-reported health is worse for people with profound or severe disabilities, with 45% reporting fair or poor health. 15% of Australian adolescents and young people, that is, people aged between 15 and 29, with disabilities have poor psychological health compared with 8% of their non-disabled peers. People with intellectual disabilities are more likely to have been diagnosed with depression than the general Victorian community. People with disabilities are more likely to have chronic illness than people without disabilities. Life expectancy is much lower in people with a range of disabilities, including cerebral palsy, spinal bifida, and multiple sclerosis. Let's look at social participation. The disadvantage experienced by people with a disability limits the extent to which they can participate in the community. Segregated education and the employment settings, lower employment rates, and community attitudes all contribute to this. People with an intellectual disability reported that they were less likely to be able to get help from family, friends, or neighbours than the general community, despite living, on average, longer in their area than the general population. People with disabilities residing in private dwellings are more likely to live alone compared with those without disabilities. People with a disability are less likely to visit cultural or leisure venues or participate in team sports. To gain a personal view of inequality and poverty, I've interviewed a friend who has been in a wheelchair for life. His name is Donald, and he has a very special story to share. Do you believe people with disabilities like yourself are more likely to suffer from equality and poverty?
Every now and again, yeah, I do. Just depending on the circumstances that the person's in.
Yeah.
If they're in a like a small town or things that can infect it.
Yeah.
Impact it, and
Yeah. And what sorts of inequalities have you personally been affected by?
none really.
You've had none?
No.
No? Okay. Have you ever suffered from social inequality as a result of your disability?
I think, yeah, you do, especially if you're in a big city.
Yeah.
Then they more tend to just think of able-bodied people and not worry about people with disabilities. And then if they see a person with a disability, they just go, no, and just a bit weird, or, and just single them out. So yeah.
Yeah. And do you find it hard to find places that have access for your wheelchair?
Yeah, that's a big problem a lot of the time.
Yeah.
All the new places now have to have wheelchair access, but if you go to towns and things like that that are old, they don't have to fix up their premises to accommodate for disability access, but so that, yeah, it is a big problem.
Yeah. And has your disability had negative impact on your financial status at all?
No.
No, not at all?
No, well, the only thing is, like I'm lucky because I work full time, but with the pension, that you can get a disability pension, but with that, you can only work 19 hours a week. And for someone like in my situation that wants to work more, if they work any more than 19 hours a week, they don't get a pension, so then therefore they've got to actually force themselves to work more to make the money up that they would get from the pension.
So you don't receive any financial benefits at all?
Not no more.
Not no more, but you have in the past?
I used to, especially when I was at school. I used to get like mobility allowance and a part pension. Then when I started working full time, they cut me off because of that. Then I had to fight to get a Medicare card because the Medicare card still covers my medical expenses, whereas that's what I used to use the pension a lot for.
Yeah.
So I was going to be disadvantaged if I had neither. So
Yeah. And do you think it's essential for the government to supply these benefits to people like yourself?
I do, especially for the medical factor.
Yeah.
So medical expenses can be huge. Like, that can be $100, like above $100 in a month or so, depending on circumstances, whether you've got pressure sores, things like that.
Yeah. And do you find it easy to find a job, or did you find it hard?
No, well, I was lucky because I got the job through work experience, through school, and then they offered me a traineeship. So, but yes, I applied for probably 10 jobs before then.
Yeah.
Every single job I applied for, I got an interview, and then I get the job.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that's a factor. They'll give you an interview, and then you go to the interview, you do the interview, and then they look at you and well, that's how it feels sometimes.
Yeah.
And then you don't get the job. You may be the suitable person, but yeah.
Yeah. And has your current workplace had to accommodate for you, or?
Yeah, they have. They've done a whole heap of modifications to each workplace, or office and workstation as well.
Yeah.
But that is partly funded by the government.
Okay.
So the government actually do fund employers to do those kind of things.
Yeah. And what sort of things have they had to do?
Mainly just ramps.
Mainly ramps. Yeah.
Yeah. And lowering some desks, but that's it.
Yeah. And what advice can you give to other people with disabilities?
Well, all I would say to them is, if you want to do it, do it.
Yeah.
You know, like from my experience, I may want to do something and think, well, I can't do that. Then I go away and I think, well, how can I do that? So then you do it. So I'd tell the person not to hide away. Like, you see a lot of people with disabilities, they hide away and just shut themselves off thinking, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And that's not true. You just got to find a way to do it.
Do it. Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's all, Donald. Thank you for your time.
No worries.
Thank you.
People living with a disability will encounter several secondary issues after their condition. One of these issues is their financial situation. Some people may be able to work part-time with several schemes that assist the disabled with finding employment. However, for others that can't find employment due to the situation, it can be very stressful for them and their families, as it can become a major issue. As well as a lack of financial sustainability for a disabled individual to help them with keeping up with everyday costs. Depending on their condition, they may also need equipment and/or specialised care to help them with everyday tasks. For example, an individual who suffers from paralysis might need specialised lifting crane to help them get them out of bed every morning, a wheelchair to help them move around independently, and easy access ramps to make it easier for them to move in and out of their home. To help alleviate these pressures that the disabled population face every day, the government offers a disability payment to help with the additional costs as well as everyday costs that this population face. This payment was brought in by Bob Hawke-led Labor government in 1991 under the Social Security Act. Currently, as previously stated, over 800,000 people with a disability receive a disability pension, with a further 140,000 receiving a New Start allowance. If equipment is needed for those who have trouble with mobility due to their condition, However, as stated previously, for those who have the mobility and the ability to work, there are schemes to assist the disabled with finding a job and gaining independency in the process. One of these schemes is the Transition to Work scheme that is provided by Disability Services Australia. During the scheme, the DSA assists the disabled to identify their personal employment goals and develop strategies to achieve these goals. With this and other working schemes available to the disabled, along with government assistance on offer to this population, there are many ways to help ease the burden for the disabled.
Unfortunately, inequality and poverty may cause disabled people to feel or experience discrimination, antisocial, sadness, unloved, loneliness, disadvantage, vulnerability, ashamed, health issues, deprivation, unworthy, exclusion, incapable, homelessness, frustrated, bullied, uneducated, unemployment, and even neglect. It's time to make a stand and help these people to live a normal life.